Misao and Iwo Jima, engaged in suicidal charges when it became obvious that a fight was lost. Other symbols of samurai influence also emerged. For instance, the wearing of traditional swords by Japanese officers in combat became customary.
You even have pilots carrying samurai swords with them in the cockpits of their planes.
And then there were the kamikaze, pilots who embarked on suicide missions, crashing their planes into Allied ships at sea. By taking the name kamikaze, the divine wind that destroyed the attacking Mongol armada in the 13th century, the modern-day pilots linked themselves to a glorious past.
There was definitely a consciousness which one can perceive from the poetry they wrote as their farewell poems and other things, that they were, for better or for worse, managing to recreate or reconnect themselves with something from their past which they felt was real.
Following the Japanese defeat in 1945, however, open displays of pride in the samurai past and the way of the warrior submerged for a number of years. But by the 1970s, signs of them surfaced once again. In an extreme case, renowned Japanese author Yukio Mishima, known for his fervent nationalism and resentment of the U.S. authored Japanese Constitution, staged a mini-insurrection at the headquarters of the Japanese Self-Defense Forces. Mishima had spent his life glorifying the samurai past and had been heavily influenced by works of warrior philosophy, such as the classic Hagakure. He had also become obsessed with the idea of committing seppuku, or harakiri. On November 25, 1970, the famous author, along with a group of followers, entered the Self-Defense Forces compound on false pretenses. Mishima then ordered his men to seize and restrain the commandant.
He said, please assemble the 900 fellows on the base here. I need to talk to them. And he stepped out on the balcony and delivered himself a beautifully written manifesto while helicopters and the press swirled around him overhead.
Mishima asked the gathered soldiers to rise up with him in the name of the emperor and help him restore Japan to its former military glory.
He knew full well, in my opinion, that that would never happen. But he wanted, in my view, the death which this allowed him to die.
When the soldiers booed him, Mishima cut his speech short and withdrew back into the headquarters. Then, with help from two of his closest aides, he carried out the ancient method of warrior suicide he had romanticized since childhood.
In front of the horrified commandant, he opened his belly and was then beheaded by his second-in-command, a young man who is now also venerated by the Japanese Rite, who then also committed harakiri himself and was beheaded by a third of these fellows.
The incident stunned the Japanese people, who by now had fully recovered from the war and were enjoying a measure of Western-style economic prosperity. But in the hearts of many Japanese, the radical action also evoked a strange sadness.
Many people, although it was dangerous to do so, were moved by this in ways that they were careful about expressing following it. Although there was, to be sure, personal, idiosyncratic pathology involved in Mishima's end, there was at the same time an embodiment of the kind of despair that many Japanese were feeling about making so much money and feeling so empty, and about feeling culturally disinherited, disconnection from the traditions that, mythological or not, were at the center of Japan's view of itself into the past.
Through the 1980s and early 90s, Japan continued to prosper. But even in an age of conference calls and cubicles, some Japanese businessmen looked once again to ancient samurai wisdom for help in their corporate battles. The Book of Five Rings, written in 1643 by legendary swordsman Miyamoto Musashi, discusses Zen-inspired fighting techniques and battle tactics. The work became popular among corporate warriors in both Japan and the United States, who were hoping to gain an advantage in the boardroom. Today, the samurai legacy persists most obviously in the form of martial arts academies. Many of these schools still require their students to study the warrior code and to strive to behave according to the virtues it promotes. Glimpses of the samurai past can also be seen at heritage festivals hosted by many Japanese municipalities. These festivals feature living historians decked out in full samurai battle armor, parading through the streets on horseback. Finally, the samurai has also become a staple of popular culture. Samurai themes continue to hold fascination for filmmakers and video game creators.
Even though the samurai as a class no longer exists, interest in them, interest in the martial arts, even if you look at Star Wars with the lightsabers, you know, I mean, it's something which I almost think is still alive. And it's not confined to Japan.
The ancient ways of the sword and bow may have been harsh, but in the view of many, their accompanying virtues of loyalty, self-discipline, and self-sacrifice are as valuable today as they were 1,000 years ago. At the origin of a noble warrior tradition, the tradition of the samurai.